My girlfriend lived a double life, sleeping with 15 men while with me. Discovering the truth shattered me, but I rebuilt myself piece by piece, learned to trust my instincts, and moved on stronger, leaving her betrayal in the past. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Thank you. My name is Ryan Carter. I'm 28 years old, and for most of my adult life, I thought I understood love. I grew up in a small coastal town where relationships weren't just casual flings. They were lifelong commitments. My parents had been together for over 3 decades. My friends dated people they'd known since high school, and trust was the currency everyone spent freely. I wasn't the type to fall quickly. I took my time, kept my guard up, made sure I knew someone before letting them close. And then Emily walked into my life. She was the kind of woman who turned heads without even trying, bright, magnetic, the kind of presence that made you forget the rest of the room existed. But it wasn't just her beauty. It was her energy. Her laughter had this unpolished joy to it, like she wasn't performing for anyone. She made me feel like I could relax, like I didn't have to be on guard. We started dating, and before long, I found myself making plans for a future I never thought I'd want so soon. 2 years passed in what felt like moments. We traveled together, celebrated milestones, spent quiet nights on the couch watching bad TV. She met my family and they adored her. I thought I had found my person, the one I'd grow old with. But while I was busy building that dream, she was building something else entirely, something that would eventually bring the walls of my life crashing down around me. At first, everything still felt perfect, or at least, that's what I told myself. But even the clearest glass can hide cracks if you're not looking for them. Started small. A missed call here, a delayed reply there. Emily had always been quick to answer me, whether she was at work, out with friends, or halfway across the city. But now, there were gaps, hours where I couldn't reach her, only for her to respond later with vague explanations. She began going out more often. Nights that were once reserved for the two of us turned into girls' nights I was never invited to. She would come home smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't hers. And sometimes, faint traces of cologne. When I asked about it, she'd laugh, brushing it off as probably from hugging friends. Her phone, once casually left on the coffee table, became her constant companion. She'd keep it face down, the screen lighting up with messages she'd read quickly before slipping it into her pocket. The change was subtle, almost invisible if you weren't paying attention. But I noticed. I just didn't want to admit it. The strangest thing was her eyes. Emily had always looked at me with a warmth that made the rest of the world fade away. But now, sometimes, I'd catch her staring past me, her expression unreadable, as if she were somewhere else entirely. I convinced myself it was stress, maybe work. I told myself relationships had ups and downs, that I was being paranoid. After all, she still said she loved me. She still kissed me goodnight. But deep down, in the quiet place inside me I tried to ignore, I felt it, the first hairline fractures in the glass. And I knew, eventually, something was going to break. It was a rainy Thursday evening, the kind where the sound of water against the windows makes the apartment feel smaller, more intimate. Emily had left for a late dinner with a friend from work, leaving her laptop open on the couch. I wasn't looking for anything. At least, that's what I told myself. But when the screen lit up with a notification, a message from a name I didn't recognize, my curiosity twisted into something sharper. The preview was short, but the words were enough to tighten my chest. Last night was unforgettable. My first instinct was denial. It had to be a joke, a misunderstanding, a message meant for someone else. My hands hesitated above the trackpad. Then I clicked. The message thread unfolded like a slow-motion car crash. Dates, flirty comments, explicit details about nights I thought she'd spent alone or with friends. This wasn't a single mistake, it was a connection, ongoing for weeks. My stomach churned. I could feel my pulse in my ears, each beat louder than the last. My mind was racing, trying to stitch together timelines, to reconcile the Emily I knew with the one in these messages. When she came home later, I confronted her, not with rage, but with confusion, desperation. She didn't deny it. Instead, she minimized it, called it a drunken lapse, a meaningless fling. She promised it was over, that it had never been serious. And I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. The thought that the woman I loved could betray me in such a deliberate way was too heavy to carry. So I told myself it was a one-time mistake. I didn't realize it was only the first crack in the dam, one that would soon burst and drown everything we had. For a while after that night, things seemed better. Emily was attentive again, more present. She cooked dinner, planned small outings, even left her phone on the table without hesitation. It felt like we were finding our way back to each other. But patterns have a way of resurfacing, no matter how hard you try to ignore them. It began with small changes. She started going out more often again, this time under the pretense of networking events or catching up, with friends she hadn't seen in years. She dressed differently for these nights, more elaborate, more deliberate. Her hair would be done just so, her perfume stronger, lingering in the air long after she left. I noticed the familiar behaviors creeping back in. The phone, once left in plain sight, was now always within her reach. She took calls in the other room, speaking in a low voice I couldn't quite hear. Messages lit up her screen late at night, but she never seemed to respond when I was looking. A mutual friend mentioned seeing her at a bar with another man, not in a casual way, but leaning in close, her hand resting lightly on his arm. When I brought it up, she brushed it off with a smile, claiming it was an old friend she'd run into by chance. I wanted to believe her, but my gut told me otherwise. The more I paid attention, the more I saw it. Nights where she was unreachable. Weekends where she had plans I wasn't part of. A faint smell of cologne on her clothes that didn't belong to me. It wasn't just one mistake anymore, it was a routine. A cycle. And no matter how much I wanted to think we could fix it, I could feel the truth pressing in around me. Emily wasn't mine anymore. She hadn't been for a long time. It happened on a quiet Sunday morning, the kind of morning that should have been calm. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a half-empty mug of coffee, scrolling aimlessly through my phone, when a new message appeared in my inbox. It was from a man I didn't know. His tone was apologetic, almost hesitant, as if he wasn't sure whether he should even be telling me this. But he did. He told me he'd been involved with Emily, only to find out later that she was in a relationship with me. He said he felt I deserved to know. His message alone was enough to shake me, but what came next cracked the world beneath my feet. He wasn't the only one. He'd met others, men who had their own stories, their own timelines, their own evidence. 15 different men during the time Emily had been with me. The number made my head spin. It wasn't just betrayal, it was calculated deceit, sustained over months, maybe even years. Each name he gave me carried weight, a reminder that while I was making dinner for her, planning trips, and talking about our future, she was living another life entirely. My hands shook as I read through the details. Dates that overlapped with times she'd told me she was working late. Trips she'd taken with friends that were actually with someone else. Even a few nights where she'd been with one of them. Before coming home to me, it was no longer a question of if she'd betrayed me. It was a record, a history of lies so layered I couldn't even tell where the truth had been. And for the first time since we'd been together, I realized there was nothing left to save. When you've been lied to for that long, you imagine the moment of confrontation 1,000 different ways, anger, shouting, maybe even some kind of twisted confession that makes it all make sense. But reality is never as satisfying. I waited until she came home that evening. She walked in like it was any other night, tossing her bag on the couch, humming softly to herself. For a moment, I almost couldn't bring myself to start. Part of me wanted to pretend I didn't know, to go one more night without facing the truth. But that part of me had been dying slowly for months. I told her what I knew. Not just one man, 15. Names, dates, places. Every lie, every excuse she'd given me, stripped bare. She didn't cry. She didn't deny it. She just looked at me with this cold detachment, like she was listening to a business proposal she'd already decided to reject. When she finally spoke, her voice was almost casual. She said she hadn't been happy, that she'd needed more, that she'd been chasing something I couldn't give her. Her words didn't hurt in the way I expected. They numbed me. It wasn't just the betrayal of her actions. It was the realization that the love I thought we had didn't exist for her, not in the way it did for me. There was no apology, no attempt to fix it. She didn't even seem sorry. And that, somehow, was worse than the cheating itself. By the time she left that night, I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I was hollow. The person I had loved was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize, and maybe had never really known at all. The days after she left blurred together into something shapeless and heavy. Mornings didn't feel like beginnings anymore. They were just the moments I realized I had to survive another day. I stopped answering calls. Friends reached out, but I couldn't face their voices, couldn't hear the pity that would inevitably slip into their tone. I told them I was fine. I wasn't. Sleep became a stranger. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything, every smile, every touch, every night I thought she was mine. The details burned in my mind, tainted now, each one carrying a shadow of what she'd been doing behind my back. Anger simmered just beneath the surface, but it wasn't the kind that explodes. It was quiet, corrosive. It didn't push me to lash out. It pulled me inward, eroding my trust in everyone, even myself. How could I have missed it? How could I have loved someone so completely while they were living a double life in plain sight? Food lost its taste. Music felt hollow. The camera I once carried everywhere sat untouched in the corner. My world shrank to the size of my apartment, and even that felt too big for just me. There were moments I wanted to reach out to her, not to get her back, but to demand answers, to make her understand what she'd done. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't matter. People like Emily don't explain. They just move on, leaving the wreckage behind for someone else to clean up. And so I stayed in that spiral, trapped between anger and grief, until the mirror forced me to face a truth I hadn't been ready for. She had taken too much of me already. If I didn't start fighting for myself, I was going to lose the rest. It happened one night when I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The man staring back at me wasn't the one I remembered. My shoulders were slumped, my eyes hollow, my skin pale from days without sunlight. It hit me with brutal clarity. Emily had already taken so much from me, and if I kept living like this, she'd take the rest. That realization didn't come with a sudden rush of motivation. There was no dramatic soundtrack in the background, no lightning bolt of inspiration. It was quieter than that. Just a whisper in my mind telling me, enough. I started small. I cleaned my apartment, really cleaned it, throwing out anything that reminded me of her. The shirt she left in my closet, the wine glasses we bought together, the travel photos from trips that now felt like lies. The emptiness that remained was painful, but it was mine. Next, I picked up my camera again. The first shots were clumsy, my hands unsteady, my creativity rusty. But slowly, the familiar rhythm returned, the way the lens framed the world, the way the light shifted at sunset. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of control over something. I began reconnecting with people I'd pushed away. Old friends, colleagues, even family members who'd been waiting for me to resurface. Their voices, their laughter, reminded me that life existed beyond the walls I'd built around my pain. It wasn't a straight climb. Some days were still heavy, some nights still restless. But each morning I woke up, I chose deliberately to take back one more piece of myself. Emily was no longer the center of my story. I was, and for the first time since it all fell apart, that felt like enough. Closure isn't something you can plan for. It doesn't arrive neatly wrapped, with all the answers you've been waiting for. Sometimes, it sneaks up on you in the most ordinary moments. It had been months since I'd last seen Emily when it happened. I was walking downtown, camera slung over my shoulder, scouting locations for a shoot. The air was warm, the kind of day where the streets hum with life. That's when I saw him, one of the men from the list. He recognized me before I could even decide whether to acknowledge him. He walked over, a hesitant look in his eyes, and introduced himself. His tone was careful, almost apologetic, as if he was bracing for anger. We talked for a few minutes, standing in the shade of a cafe awning. He told me he hadn't known she was in a relationship when they first met. When he found out, he cut ties. He admitted he wasn't the only one who'd been caught in her web. There had been others, and from what he'd heard, she was still out there, still living in the same reckless way. I listened, and to my own surprise, I didn't feel the sharp stab of betrayal anymore. No rage, no grief, just nothing. She was no longer the woman in my memories. She was simply a name, a face from a chapter I'd already closed. When we parted ways, I realized something important. I didn't need an apology from her. I didn't need her to understand what she'd done. The life she was living now was its own consequence, and I was no longer a part of it. That realization was my closure. Not because she gave it to me, but because I took it for myself. It's been over a year since the night everything fell apart, and my life now feels like it belongs to someone else, a better version of me, one forged in the fire of betrayal. I wake up in a different apartment, one I chose without her shadow hanging over it. The walls are lined with my photography, each frame a reminder of the places I've been and the moments I've captured. The clutter is gone, replaced by a calm I never knew I needed. Work is steady, and my circle is small but real. People who have proven their loyalty not through words, but through presence. I've learned to value consistency over charm, honesty over flattery. Do I still think about her? Occasionally, not in longing, not even in anger, but in recognition. She was a lesson, one that taught me the importance of listening to my instincts, of never silencing that small voice that whispers when something isn't right. I no longer measure love by grand gestures or perfect words. I measure it by action, by the quiet moments where loyalty is proven without fanfare. And I know that when I love again, it will be with both my heart and my eyes open. Emily didn't just cheat on me. She dismantled the version of myself that relied on blind trust. And for that, oddly enough, I'm grateful. Because what rose from the wreckage is someone stronger, sharper, and far less willing to compromise their worth for the sake of keeping someone else. I've moved on, not in the way people say to convince themselves they're fine, but in the real way. She's not my story anymore. This is my story now. And it's only just beginning. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Thank you.